I'm Ralph Sutton, and you can follow me everywhere at I Am Ralph Sutton, and my podcast, The SDR Show, at The SDR Show, or my health and wellness podcast at goodsugar.life. I have a brand new book called The 100% Guaranteed Guide to Weight Loss and Fitness, being sold on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Just write Ralph Sutton Fitness in the search bar, and you will find it. And as I said, you could find me everywhere at I Am Ralph Sutton. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for your time. I seriously appreciate it.
No worries, man.
And I wasn't lying when I said I typically don't do cheat sheets like this, because you, like me, have probably interviewed the same type of people in my place, in my situation, porn stars. Without memory. I mean, I have a template in my head, and I don't really.
Yeah, I got you. Same here.
Get into
Same
it.
here.
Tell me about Good Sugar, the podcast, the book, everything.
Okay, sure. So we'll start with that. The way that Good Sugar happened is the second podcast I'm doing. Obviously, I've been doing the SDR Show. You can see the logo right here for the last 6 years. And I had a friend, still have a friend. He has a very successful juice company here in New York called the Juice Press. And there's literally about 85, 90 locations in New York. And he sold it earlier this year. And he was looking to start a podcast. So he started doing one. He was getting ready. He was going to rent my studios. He didn't want to do it by himself. And he's known me for so long. He asked me, would you do it with me? He is a vegan forever, sober forever, does yoga, MMA fighter, super healthy guy. I'm not. So the idea of the show initially was, let's help Ralph get into a better headspace for health and wellness. And that's what started the show. The idea of Good Sugar just means that not everything you think is bad for you is good, and everything is good for you is bad. And you got to find what's good in things and bad in things, because like fruit sugars are technically very good for you, right? So that's how we started the show, Good Sugar Podcast, about a year ago. And we've been interviewing a lot of these health and wellness people. And I started laughing because the more I realized it, the more that the methods behind everyone's madness could be diluted to a very simple philosophy of just eat less and work out more. That's all that matters, right? Like if you can do that, you're going to get into better shape. That was the idea. So let me grab this 1 second. My book that I'm holding right now, the 100% Guide to Health and Wellness, which I believe I sent it to you. I don't know if you got it already, but it is literally 2 pages. The first page says eat less. The second page says work out more. And the rest of the book is blank. And the reason is you do that, and I promise you, if you can prove to me you've been doing that, you don't lose weight, I will give you your money back.
How does COVID affect all that now?
Well, the truth is, so we'll use me as a perfect example. I realized gyms were closed. I realized I didn't have many options in my apartment. So I just started running. I hate running. I've never run in my life. If you add up all the times I ran from 0 to 50, because I'm 50 years old now, for the purposes of running, for like not saying playing basketball or, running to the store or whatever, just like I'm going to go on a run. I think prior to COVID, it probably added up to in 50 years, 5 miles. That's what I would say. In the past 8 months, I've run 400 miles from never being able to. I couldn't run a minute in April. And now I can run 2 hours straight. I do 3 runs a week, every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, 3 miles, 6 miles, 9 miles every single week. I have not missed a run since April.
Book aside and running aside, how has COVID impacted your show and your professional?
Well, professionally, I would say it's changed. Like we're doing this now through Zoom on my podcast, as I did with my radio show for 15 years. I would not do, unless it was completely unavoidable, over the phone or Skype or Zoom interviews. I only wanted in person. I always felt like there is this connection you make when you look at someone face to face, micro expressions, body language, camaraderie, whatever it is, sitting right next to somebody that you cannot duplicate through something like this. It's never going to be the same. So what I did for SDR, we kind of pivoted the show a little bit. It became much more of an interview-based show as opposed to what it's been for the first 5 years, which was like a drinking and hanging and, it was like a party every single week. But I just came to a realization, well, that's not going to happen right now. So we've changed a little bit. But what I did instead was I did 2 shows a week. So we're giving you more since we realize it's not what it used to be, we're giving you more. Same thing with the network. I went out of my way for Gas Digital. We didn't fire anybody. We brought on more shows. We offered a 30-day free trial just to do things to kind of incentivize you to become part of the network. Instead of what I saw a lot of networks doing, stopping all new programming, basically, playing dead. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to attack it as opposed to succumb to it. And I feel like that made a big difference because I think we grew our membership by 50% since COVID started.
Is it difficult for you because you're on the East Coast trying to get people to come in? Because I'm right in the valley and we're in the middle of porn. And you'd be amazed how difficult it is for getting someone to show up.
Well, I mean, now I don't even ask. But if we're talking about pre-COVID times,
right.
we're in Manhattan, and we offer to send a car, so everybody comes through the city at some point. So I would be scheduled about 6 weeks out, looking at calendars for rock shows, comedy shows, porn conventions, Comic-Cons, whatever they were, and from there we could pull a list of people that were potentially coming to the area. And fortunately, we've been lucky. We would always get a guest every week. With Zoom, it opened up a world of opportunity because we were live 9 p.m. on Wednesdays. So if you couldn't come in 9 p.m. on a Wednesday, we weren't doing the show. Now, with Jay's home a lot, I'm home a lot. The deal is you tell me when you can do it and we'll make it work. So we've had, this year we had Neil deGrasse Tyson on, Ray Romano on, Rob Schneider's on this week. We've gotten huge guests that we probably would never have gotten normally because of the fact that we've opened up a 24/7 window that works, and you tell me when it is for you and I'll make it work. So that's the one, to me, the positive thing that came out of COVID is by doing the Zoom interviews, I reached to people that I normally would never have had a prayer of getting. I mean, Ray Romano doesn't do podcasts. He's never done any. And we got lucky that I met him in LA in January. Just by chance, I sat down at a restaurant and I heard his voice. I'm like, the Ray Romano voice. Who doesn't know that voice? I'm like, that's Ray Romano. I started talking to him that he worked a comedy club that my mother ran 40 years ago, 35 years ago. And I just mentioned it to him. He remembered my mother. We exchanged numbers. It took a few months, but then he called in on Zoom, and it was an honor to have him on.
You touched on it briefly, but have you interviewed any of your idols, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's been so many. So we'll start with, I did a radio show called The Tour Bus for 16 years, and it was on almost 100 stations. So growing up, I was a crazy 80s rock fan. I'm 50. I was 15 in 85. Oh, really? Oh, well, there we go. And so the Guns N' Roses, Whitesnake, AC/DC, Motley Crue, Van Halen, those bands, I worshipped. I had posters of them on my wall, and I'd wait online for albums when they came out. I was 16, 17, and that's all I cared about, right? Fast forward to 20 years later doing the radio show, The Tour Bus, to be able to not only interview these guys, but I'll never forget, one night, this is going back a couple of years, Tommy Lee texted me and said, dude, I'm in town. Where are you? And I was like, wow, imagine 1988-year-old Ralph getting that message would shit his pants. Now it's just kind of funny. Hey, Tommy Lee just texted me. It's kind of a cool thing. So the fact that I actually got to be able to sit with these people, and people like some of my favorites, David Coverdale, who Whitesnake was one of my favorite bands of all time, right? To be able to sit with them. Queensryche, to become friends with the bands in Queensryche. Living Color, that I was so into those first two records like crazy, where I talked to Corey, the singer, pretty regularly, So to have that transition happen is incredible to me. I've never been able to believe that happened. To sit in a room and watch, on the radio show, Queensryche performing live in my bedroom is insane. There's a video of that. If you go on YouTube and Google, on YouTube and search Queensryche bedroom performance, is a performance of them performing Eyes of a Stranger in my apartment. And it's crazy. I never thought that would happen. It's great. And then as we started SDR, not only did we get, because then it was all rock stars, but to get comics on, like a Ray Romano that I've loved my whole life, that any one of these people, I love the Impractical Jokers, to get them on the show, to be able to make these things happen. And it's funny is, one of my lifelong dreams was to be able to go to Saturday Night Live. You know, I've been watching since I was a kid. It's been on 50 years almost. Since I can remember. I think it started in 75, so it's 45 years. And I tried a million times. You have a better chance of winning the lottery than getting a ticket to SNL. And then we had Pete Davidson on. We had Michael Che on, excuse me. And so Jay became good friends with him, and I got to go to SNL the year before last, and it was the Woody Harrelson, Kendrick Lamar episode, which was a great episode. And I got to bring my brother. I have a twin brother, and the fact that we got to go together, we're both such big fans, to knock that off your bucket list because of my stupid podcast is a great feeling.
How did that show come up in the first place? The tour bus.
SDR? Oh,
tour bus. The tour bus.
So, I always was a fan of radio, but in college, I went for the radio station, and I was a radio DJ for a very, very short time. I think I did 2 shifts, right? But what happened was, when I was training, I got to pick every song I wanted to play. When it was time to be on the air, I was like, oh, I got to play what you tell me to play. I did not enjoy that at all, right? I just didn't want to be a part of that. So I kind of stepped down from the idea of radio, but it was something I always loved. And then what happened was I became a strip club DJ. And I was doing that for quite a while. Did it for 15 years of my life. But one day, I hear a guy that worked the day shift, because I'd worked the night shift, he worked day shift, new guy. Voice was incredible, but I could tell he never worked at a strip club. I could just listen to what he was saying, knew he had no idea what he was doing, started talking to him, and he just started working at the radio station around the corner and was doing this for extra money. And I said, I'll make you a deal. I'll teach you everything you need to know about this, and you get me a meeting with your boss. And he said, okay. And then a week later, I met the guy. He liked my voice. He came to see me at the strip club. I gave him a free table dance. Next thing you know, I was offered the midnight to 6 in the morning shift. And I did it once a week from Saturday to Sunday. And after a few months, I pitched the idea of what I initially called, the show was called Modern Classics. And the idea was my generation's classic rock. Because when I was a kid, classic rock was Led Zeppelin and the Stones. And here I am, 30 years old, and classic rock radio is still Led Zeppelin and the Stones. What about my classic rock? And that was the idea behind the tour bus. We started out at a small station in New Jersey from 10 to midnight on Sundays. 6 months into it, we went to first place from last place and grew our listenership by 5 times, and then went to the #1 rock station in Jersey. 6 months after that, we got a syndication deal. 6 months after that, we were on 5 stations, and then eventually got to about, I think the height was like 92 stations. I round up and say 100 because it sounds better, but at the most, I think it was about 92 stations, and somewhere in there, I always forget the exact number. But then I did that most of my adult life. I was a radio DJ from 30 to 20, really 29 to 46 years old. I mean, that's what I did. That was my life. But 6 years ago, the writing was on the wall to me. Radio was not going to make me money anymore the way it was making me money. It was just became a hobby that brought me a few dollars a month, but certainly not enough to live on. And I was hosting this cruise called Shiprocked, and I hosted that for about 10 years, but this was maybe year 3 or 4. And they asked me to find a rock and roll comedian, and I knew this guy, Jay Okerson, and I started talking to him. I got him on as a comic, and him and I ended up hosting a lot of events together. He pitched the idea of doing a podcast together, and I jokingly said to him, that's cute, but podcasting is for people that can't do radio. I'm doing radio, so thanks, but no thanks. But a year later, after reading all this stuff about podcasts and how big they're getting, I said to him, you know what? I would be willing. Let's give it a shot. Let's try a podcast. And what's funny is the logo, the URL, the imaging initially, I had it all done because I was going to do a morning show called Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll. But I never thought the money was enough to get up at 4 a.m. So I gave up on the idea. But I just had everything done already. So when he said, what are we going to call it? I sent him the image, and he goes, all right, done. Let's do it. And that's how we started. So I transitioned from the tour bus to the SDR show. And then to just put a button on it, after a couple of years of doing SDR, I said, you know, for years I made money in radio from taking 50, 60, 70 small stations. You put them together, and you can make a living. You know, where any one of those stations you wouldn't make a living, but you put them all together. So let's get 4 or 5 small podcasts and then start selling them as a package like a network. And that's how we started Gas Digital Network. And that's where we transferred from Tour Bus to STR to Gas Digital.
Myself included, well, not yet, but it seems like everybody today has a podcast. From your own experience, what makes a successful or good podcast?
Well, I mean, I've always said the good thing and the bad thing about is that anybody can have a podcast. That's great news, and it's also horrible news because there's a lot of crap out there, right? And I've consulted a lot with potential podcasters. I was working for CBS Radio a couple of years ago on how to consult on what makes a good podcast, right? And I think that radio was both a good thing and a bad thing for me starting a podcast, in that in the good side, it helped me learn about good quality audio, which is super important, because they listen first. The first thing they're going to do, if they hear shitty audio, they're going to tune out, So number one is quality audio. Number two is being able to just carry on a conversation. Those kind of things that you learn from radio, to understand timing and TSL, time spent listening, stuff like that, But what I wasn't prepared for, I would talk in 2-minute breaks or 3-minute breaks. And I was talking about this the other day. You listen to the old SDR shows, an hour was an hour. Our shows were 1 hour, because radio, there is no 1 hour and 2 minutes. Top of the hour is top of the hour, or they're cutting your mics. End of story. So I was super hyper over aware to keep it to an hour. And it took me a while, A, to learn to extrapolate stories, and B, to not worry so much about timing, right? So what makes someone worth listening to? I say this to everybody. Pick a category, whatever it is. Go listen to the top 10 shows in that category and figure out why they're the top 10 shows. From that, you can extrapolate what you can do better, what you don't like, and what you think can make your show stand out and be different. The good news is, while you hear there's a million podcasts right now, somewhere around 1 million, sounds horrible, right? Well, there's 1 billion YouTube channels. There's 1 billion Instagrammers. So 1 million is not so bad when you look at it that way, right? It's a far less audience than what's trying to become a YouTuber or trying to become a TikToker. There's far more people competing to that space. And with podcasting, the CPM rate is 10 times higher, which is, cost per thousand, which is how you get paid. So it may sound daunting, but if you look at it compared to the landscape of the other forms of entertainment, it is a far more narrow lane. So it's not as ominous as you think it is, right? Consistency is super important. I never miss a show. I don't care what's happening. Have 2 or 3 in the can if you need to be safe. But I hate to say this to be so morbid, but my father passed away on a Friday, and I did a show that Monday. I mean, that's how consistent I am. I don't want to miss a show. So if you have good quality audio, you're very consistent, you're comfortable with whatever topic you choose, that's 80% of the battle, right? Then the trick is, well, how do you differentiate? And I really believe ABP, which is always be promoting. I carry stickers with me all the time. I consider a day a failure. Prior COVID, if I didn't get at least 5 people to give me a review, I'll talk to them at a coffee shop or at the store, whatever, hey, check out my podcast. Or else, if you're not doing that, if you're not living and breathing your podcast, it's not going to become popular. It's just not. You got to be your podcast. And then I think the other thing is, excuse me, I'm sorry, my voice is going. You have to be super passionate. You have to love it. You have to be it's a weird balance of never being happy, because you should never be content. You should always strive for better, but to also have it bring you joy. It should be both. It should be a combination of both. Like, I remember I did a podcast. It's a pretty popular podcast, Chip Chipperson, which is Jim Norton's podcast. And he had just exploded. I don't remember how many numbers he got, but I'm going to make up numbers right now. So I said, hey, congratulations. I saw the last video got 50,000 views. That's a pretty good start for a new podcast. And his response was, I don't know, Joe Rogan gets 9 million. So is that good? So it just shows you, no matter how popular you are, there's always somewhere else to strive for. And that's where you should be. You should always think, all right, I got 1,000 listeners now. Great. How do I get 5,000? I got 5,000. Why is it not 20,000? That's what you should always be trying to do. And if you're not doing that, you're just going to fall to the wayside. The good news is also, every podcast is one viral clip away from being 100,000 listener. You have a clip that goes viral. We had it happen a couple of weeks ago with this crazy thing that happened with Sebastian Bach and Rob Halford, and the podcast exploded. Like we just were mentioned on every rock website, and it was just insane. You know, I believe any publicity is good publicity, and even though it was a little negative, but it was still, it brought a ton of new views and eyes and subscribers to the show.
For you personally, what makes a good interview? Is it informative? Is it get you involved? Is what?
What's funny, what I've learned over the years, and it was a hard lesson to learn, is that all the prep in the world, which I do a lot of prep, a lot for every interview, can't shield you from sometimes an interview just doesn't click, right? I don't know why that is.
I know.
You know, but I do believe you need to be well prepared. I've felt that way since the old radio show days, right? So especially now that I'm doing 3 shows a week, 2 for SDR, 1 for Good Sugar, that's like 6 hours of prep work every week. That's at least, and it's a lot. But I feel it helps because not only does it make you feel like, oh, I got this, but what it does do also is it makes your guest feel like, oh, he cares enough to actually put some thought into this, as opposed to let's just wing it. You know, I really believe that that's a big aspect to helping get a good interview. But what I learned, the hard lesson I learned, is that some of my best interviews have been people I thought, this is going to be horrible. Like, I don't even want to talk to this person. And then for whatever reason, that was the best interview. Sometimes the interviews you think, oh my God, I can't believe I'm getting to talk to this guy. And it was just terrible, right? So I think that I had to learn, don't put any preconceived notions into what's going to happen in the interview. Just be prepared. And most importantly, which a lot of people don't do, listen to your fucking guest. So if someone is taking you in a direction, don't stick to your questions. Yes, you'll have your questions. I used a story years ago. There's another rock radio guy that I was in competition with, and he got the big interview, which at the time was the singer of Buck Cherry. And it was like an interview I really wanted, but he ended up getting it, whatever, right? And I'm listening to the interview, and he makes a very fun, the singer, sexual joke about the guy's name. And instead of like rolling with it or even acknowledging it, he went like this, haha. So tell me about the producer. Like, totally didn't even care that the guy is showing you he wants to have fun. And you just are sticking to your script. Like, I get it. We should have the questions. It's great to come up with questions that I have a clips being put together for Good Sugar, because the last 5 weeks in a row, I happen to hit a question where the guest goes, wow, that's a great question. So I want to get those clips put together.
Right, I know exactly what you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, you know, so that's just a great thing. So that's important, but also let your guest, you know, feel out your guest. Be willing to roll in a direction that, and on the flip side is true. If you make a joke and they give you a pushback, don't keep pushing, because they've already told you that that's not an area they're comfortable with.
Do you ever find that when you do, I don't want to say too much prep, but a lot of prep, your subject goes into cruise control when they're doing the answers?
Yeah, it's true. It's a fine line. You know, you don't want to be reading off. It sounds like you're reading their Wikipedia page, you know, where it's not really a fun interview. I have a kind of like a system. I go through the Wikipedia page and pull a few things that sound interesting. If they have a book, if they have a new album, if they have a new show, I'll watch it, listen to it, or read it. And then I'll watch interviews that are the most recent. And then I'll watch interviews that are the oldest I can find, because it's funny to see how their personality changed, right? Because that is almost always. So from that, I can get a profile of the person, I feel, and I'll come up with questions based on taking all that in.
When you finish your interviews and stuff, you go through and edit them for time constraints? Like if you do an hour...
Not anymore. We used to, you know, for radio. Now the only time, which has only been a couple of times in the 6 years of SDR, is if a guest was, you know, drinking with us and having fun and then said something they realized after, oh, I shouldn't have said that. If they call me and say, can you please take it out? If it's before the show's been released, I'll take it out, right? And it's happened a couple of times, but it's happened a couple of times on the other side where they say, can you please take it out? I'm like, dude, it's been released everywhere.
Yeah,
like,
I know exactly what you're saying.
I can edit the source file, but that's not going to change people that have downloaded it, people that have reshared
Right.
it, people that have, you can't get rid of all of it. So at this point, there's really not much I can do.
Top of your head, what's the craziest show you've done as far as SDR?
I've always used this example because I think that it is it is our most listened to episode ever. And I had this idea years ago in radio, but you can't do it in radio. So I was so happy to get it done. It was done in the first year of SDR, called the Olympics. And on the Olympics, we hired a $100 escort and we hired a $1,000 escort. And then we got blindfolded, hands tied behind our back, and got 1 minute blowjobs from each of them without knowing who was who, and then picked which blowjob we liked better. And we both picked the cheaper girl. So that was a very fun episode. We've done, we do ridiculous things like that pretty often. We did one recently right before COVID. It was called International Street Meet, where we had 5 guys of varied ethnicities, and then a girl gave each guy a 30-second blowjob, but couldn't touch them or see them, and then had to guess their ethnicity based just on their penis, and she got $100 for each one right, and if she got all 5 right, she got a $500 bonus on top of it. We do dumb shit like that once in a while, and then whenever I do that, I always try and make sure the next week is a super serious interview, because I just think it's hilarious. Like one week the guys are getting blowjobs, the next week I interview Mark Cuban for an hour. I just think that's funny to me.
You ever run into issues with the FCC or anybody for any problems?
Well, on podcasts, fortunately for now, we are not regulated by the FCC. That may change. In radio, 2 or 3 times I got cease and desist letters for releasing a song on the show before anybody else, which there's a strict laws on that. But what happens is they send you a cease and desist and say, don't do that again. So we just wouldn't do it again. But I have one from Guns N' Roses and one from Metallica, and I think one other, but where they sent a cease and desist because I was the first person to play it. And my favorite one was, I guess, in 2003 or 4. Guns N' Roses had a new album. The first time in forever, the song Oh My God, which was going to be from a new movie, and it was like the big deal, the new Guns N' Roses album. On Friday, Howard Stern ends his broadcast by saying, Monday morning, we're going to premiere the new Guns N' Roses song, Oh My God, at the end of the broadcast. And I said, well, if he has it, it's somewhere. And I used to be a hacker when I was a kid, and I just went on these, a thing called MIRC and searching around, finally found it somewhere. It took hours, and I downloaded it and burned it onto a CD and brought it to the station on Saturday and played it every hour on the hour and said, we're playing it before anybody. Monday comes, Howard doesn't mention it, and then the DJ that comes in next just says, we know we weren't first, but here it is, the new Guns N' Roses song. So the fact that I got that, and then a few days later, we got the cease and desist letter.
For you professionally, it's a 2-part question, but do you remember your first surreal moment when you were in this business? And when was there an event or something where you considered yourself making it?
It was a good question. So the first one was, so the singer of both Deep Purple and Rainbow, his name is Joe Lynn Turner. Yes. And I'm a big fan, of Stone Cold and, Street of Dreams and whatnot. And it's such a weird story. His wife at the time, they're no longer married, was a stripper at my strip club. So through that, because normally he would never have done my show. We were nowhere. We were a pretty new show. And I get to go to his house and sit in his house in Jersey, and we did an interview. And that was a very surreal moment. It was maybe the 3rd interview I ever did. And I'm like, what the fuck am I doing in Joe Lynn Turner's house? It was like a crazy moment for me, right? The looks like we made it moment that sticks out. This is going back to Tour Bus Radio days. We were given 5 front row passes for the Poison concert. Poison used to do these tours every year where they would be with Poison and 3 or 4 other big hair bands from the 80s, right? It was Poison, Cinderella. I don't remember who the other 2 were, right? But it was a big show in Jersey. And we were told the day before, we found out we had them. On the Saturday, we mentioned it every hour. We have these tickets. All I said was, Matt and I, who was my original co-host, we're going to be at the Fountain in the PNC Bank Arts Center at this time, right after one of the openers go on. Show us your tour bus, which meant nothing. What does that mean? I don't know, right? And whoever has the most tour bus 5 of you are going to get front row tickets, right? And we're walking over there, and I remember saying to Matt, like, Matt, there's going to be fucking nobody here. What are we doing? Like, this is going to be embarrassing for us. Why are we doing this? Like, let's just go. And we see in the distance, looks like there's nobody there at the fountain. And we get a little closer, and I hear a guy go, "They're coming!" And then all of a sudden, several hundred people run to the fountain. Some of them have our logo painted on their chest, giant banners. It was an insane moment. I was like, holy shit. There are a lot of people listening to this fucking show, and I couldn't believe it. It's not like we had months to prep it. You know, we did it. We mentioned it the night before, and that was it. So that amazed me. That was a moment I was like, oh, wow, this is really touching people. This show means a lot to people.